detoxes sound so legit, but it just doesn't work.
Dr. Megan is an award-winning researcher and best-selling author. In this episode, we will talk about simple, quick ways to boost your gut health.
The gut was kind of thought of this isolated thing. Gastroenterologists would deal with that, but it wouldn't have anything to do with mental health or our skin health. 75% of women will experience.
Really?
Yeah, it's wild.
No way.
Absolutely wild. I knew at that point that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my career to the gut.
How can you tell if you've got poor gut health?
How stressed are you? What's your mental health like? Are you avoiding certain foods due to intolerances? Women who have less than 2 pieces of fruit a day seem to have...
I didn't know that.
You don't need to spend hours in the kitchen to have good gut health or spend loads of money. It's about getting those habits formed and having the stuff in your fridge.
What are some of the potential concerns with taking electrolytes?
People are being fooled into thinking it's a health product, and actually there has been studies to suggest.
Please, before we get into the conversation, do not forget to either subscribe or leave a 5-star review. It only takes a couple of minutes. Thank you. I'm very excited to come on to all the questions that we got asked by our community. But before that, I would really like to speak to you about something I haven't really heard you speak much about that is so interesting. And that's growing up, because did you grow up on a farm in Australia?
Slightly different to my London life.
Yeah. How on earth do you go from growing up on a farm in Australia to being this gut health expert in London?
Look, I mean, I love Australia so much, right? And in fact, growing up, it was like a small town, grew up in a farm. I don't think any of my cousins went to even uni, right? From my dad's side, we were all on the farm. And yeah, I think living abroad, research, all that sort of stuff never really crossed my mind at all, right? I think it was just like, as I grew up as, my family's Italian, so we'd always go to my nana nunu's centre of the farm and we'd have like all this delicious food. So I always grew up loving food. And then actually my mum was a science teacher. And so she used to like do loads of experiments. And so it was kind of, I fell into this world of nutrition and dietetics. I'm like, I love food, I love science. This is kind of what I should do. And I'm like, I don't even know what a dietitian is, right? So then I kind of learnt more about it. And I just, I found myself, saying yes to things, doing the degree, then being obsessed with the gut. And then again, never wanted to live overseas. But my supervisor from my PhD was like, if you really want to advance your career and your research opportunities, go to London for a year and come back and then you can reestablish, And I was like, I don't know anyone in London. I'm like, what the hell is this? It's crazy. And yeah, it just kind of got stuck here in a way. But yeah, a farm girl still at heart. I love when I go back to Australia, we go fishing and, I'm a real sort of tomboy at heart. That's really interesting because I think in this day and age where, I don't know if you agree, but I think we've all become quite disconnected with where our food comes from. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you saw up close where our food comes from and had that connection. And I'd love to dive into the budget-friendly tips for gut health. But first, I want to talk about something that's a little bit of a sensitive topic, but I think it really feeds into your mission and why you've ended up doing what you're doing. I believe your grandma passed away when you were in your last year of studying. Yeah.
How did that lead to you following the path that you have done?
Yeah, look, I mean, I kind of explained that I grew up on a farm and a lot of people are like, oh, happy families and stuff like that. But actually, my mum and dad separated when I was really young. So I was kind of raised by, mum worked full time and there was the 3 of us. And then sadly we lost my sister. So there's quite a lot of trauma. And I think kind of reflecting on that probably has dictated, why I kind of got into the medical field and why I feel really passionate about things. And obviously my grandma. So my grandma was a really big part in my upbringing, essentially. She was there to pick us up from school and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, losing her and watching this organ, the gut, put her through the surgery, the chemo, and then taking her life, I hated it. I hated the gut, right? So my first conscious encounter when I was in uni, it was like, this is an awful organ. Don't want to have anything to do with it. And then I started working as a dietitian in the hospital setting, all different types of conditions, kidney disease, heart disease, weight management, type 2 diabetes, etc. But I was also really fortunate to be the nutritionist for the Australian Olympic synchronized swimming team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
oh, my gosh.
I think that was because they couldn't afford anyone more experienced at the time. And I was like, amazing, loved it. But I was working with obviously very sick people and elite athletes, right?
Wow.
Both of them coming to me complaining of the gut. And I'm like, this organ is haunting me. Like, took my grandma. Now it's like this constant thing in my career. So that's when I thought, look, I owe it to my grandma and to my patients to find out more about this. So that's when I embarked on the PhD in gut health. And I was like, I am sorry, gut. After that 3-year PhD, I was like, you are incredibly powerful. You're just misunderstood. And I knew at that point that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my career to the gut, right? Because I could improve people's lives in very real but often surprising, ways. Because at the time we didn't really, certainly in the medical field, the gut was kind of thought of this isolated thing. Gastroenterologists would deal with that, but it wouldn't have anything to do with mental health or our skin health or anything like that. So yeah, it was kind of, a negative kind of a struggle that turned into something that I was like, wow, actually I've learned a lot from this organ. And it is really a landmark scientific discovery in terms of how I can now help people improve their lives.
And gut health has just absolutely skyrocketed in terms of its popularity, and we're going to come on to how to navigate that space, because I think sometimes the marketing can sometimes be a little bit misleading, and it can be quite difficult if you're not someone with a scientific background to navigate that. So we're definitely going to come on to your top tips for that a little bit later on. I want to ask you some of our community questions because we had so many. I just want to get started straight away. The first community question that we've got is, how can you tell if you've got poor gut health? What are the early signs to watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great question, right? And you'll know, obviously, from your medical degree in terms of if you've got a kidney issue, there's a kidney test and we know what your kidney function's like. Same with your liver, same with your heart. But because gut health is not only so new in terms of our understanding of it, but also it's so complex, right? So we think of the gut, this 9-meter long tube, key for digestion, 70% of the immune system lives there. And then obviously we've got these trillions of bacteria, right? So there's just so much going on in the gut. There is no kind of single measure at the moment for me to be like, look, go get this gut test and then you'll know, right? So there's a number of different things, and we can probably link it in show notes, but I came up with, when I was writing the first book, this 10-question assessment to give people a better idea about where their gut health sits from a scale of 0 to 20. And it asks things like, yes, digestive symptoms. So, are you having issues with bloating or altered stool? That could be a sign. But also, how stressed are you? What's your mental health like? Are you avoiding certain foods due to intolerances? Like, all these other factors, actually, we're starting to see could be a sign that maybe you need to focus on your gut health.
That's really interesting. You've got a checklist. That makes it so easy. It's so important that you said that the gut health is so new and so complex, because I got my gut microbiome test done last month, and I got the results back. And obviously, with a medical degree, with a fairly good understanding and familiarity of a lot of different bacteria, and I was looking at this report so confused, because there's bacteria on there that I had never even heard of. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of what gut health is and what actually is the gut microbiome?
Yeah, that's such an important one. Yeah. So like I said, when we think of gut health generally, it is this 9-meter long tube, right?
Yeah.
And then in the last 1.5 meters of that 9 meters is where most of these trillions of different microbes live. And I say microbes, but most of them are bacteria. But we also have some fungi such as yeast and viruses and even parasites, which obviously is like, oh my God, let's go on a TikTok parasite cleanse.
Oh God.
And that people don't realize that actually this community, even though they sound scary like viruses, yes, obviously there are some bad viruses, some bad parasites, all that sort of stuff. But actually the science suggests most of them are working together. And if we look after them, like a little pet or whatever you want to think inside you, actually, again, the science is showing they will look after us. So I think we need to kind of avoid this kind of fear mongering around getting rid of all these different microbes, because actually most of them are good for us. Again, if we look after them, like a human, if you be bad to a human, they can be really mean and nasty back to you. The same with, this community, right? And then in terms of those microbiome tests, like I totally get it. And when people come in clinic and say, I've had my microbiome screen, I'm like, oh, that's really great and fun, but it's actually not going to change my clinical advice at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in 5 or so years. And if you've got the money, fine to do it.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's very much primitive in terms of it doesn't look at all the microbes that are there. So we still don't know like 20% of the bacteria in our gut. Like we don't have names for them. We don't know what they're doing. Then the tests just look at the bacteria component. They don't look at the virus component, all of that sort of stuff. They don't necessarily look at the chemicals they're producing. And our team at King's College in London actually looked and showed that actually not looking just at the bacteria, like what ones are in your gut, but actually the chemicals they're producing. So what they're actually doing is a better predictor of how someone will respond to certain diets, right?
Interesting.
So there's so much more coming out about, understanding about the microbiome. So generally speaking, I'd say don't waste your money on the microbiome tests.
That's super interesting you say that, because I was given it by this clinic, but I haven't been back to the clinic to go through the results. But I think it's really important with any of these at-home tests to acknowledge that it's probably not a good idea to be doing this at home without any guidance whatsoever, because it's really interesting to me that people who don't have a scientific background can just order these tests online and then be given this report that they don't know what to do with, or, as you said, might not actually be that useful at this stage. They probably can't navigate the results. I couldn't navigate the results. Yeah. It's just a very interesting landscape, I feel, the whole at-home testing. Coming to your clinical work that you mentioned, what would you say are the top 5 pieces of advice that you give out most often?
Yeah, look, I think it's fighting a lot of the different myths out there. I think, one myth out there is around IBS. Like a lot of people have been told historically that it's just all in their head. They just need to de-stress, get on with life, don't worry about it. And I think actually we need to appreciate that we now have much more advanced science. We know that, IBS is what we call a disorder of the gut-brain interaction. So our gut and brain's constantly communicating, and we know there are different types of dietary and lifestyle strategies that can really help. So I hope anyone, who is listening to this who might be struggling, don't kind of suffer in silence. We do have, the dietary strategies and lifestyle strategies. And yes, they can take a time to implement, doing things like diaphragmatic breathing, stuff that historically we thought was a bit hippy-dippy actually really can help relax that two-way communication and help with symptoms. And then obviously there's dietary approaches, first-line dietary approaches like, watching the caffeine, the fatty foods, how much fibre you're having. Fibre dumping is something I often speak about, where a lot of people in clinic, think and have heard, and it is, fibre is really beneficial. But when you've got something like IBS, you've got quite a sensitive gut, right? And if you dump a whole lot of fibre into it, that can aggravate symptoms all at once. But of course, I don't want people then to cut out fibre and say, I'm, intolerant to it. I should just go carnivore, right? Because we know fibre essentially is fuel for the gut bacteria. So without it, you're going to starve your bacteria, and it's a bit of a vicious cycle, more of a sensitive gut. So if you've got IBS, you just need to make sure that you're training your gut and you're spreading out the fibre across the day. And I like to kind of think of it, like your gut as any other muscle in your body. Like if you're doing a marathon, you don't just go and do this huge marathon, right? So, you don't go from a sensitive gut and just chuck all this fibre into it the next day. It's slow kind of training. So I know that was kind of one packaged all into that, but I think key, myth that IBS is not like a real thing. It is a real condition, and we do have evidence-based strategies to help people get through it. So don't suffer in silence. And kind of the other one rolled into that is that even though you've got a sensitive gut, don't cut out foods forever in terms of high fiber foods. You can train your gut. It is a muscle, just like, anyone can essentially do a marathon if they get the right training. You just have to go slow and steady.
Yeah.
So they're two, I think, common ones. I mean, we could probably go on and on. But yeah, I mean, there's things like the restrictive approaches. Again, I see that a lot where people are cutting out things like still gluten and grains. And, I appreciate if you've obviously got celiac disease, which is around 1% of the population, or you've got something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where you don't have celiac disease, but actually you do have some sort of issue with gluten. But actually, it's we think probably only maximum of 5% of the population, around 30% of people try cut out gluten, right? And again, not that gluten is this amazing thing for your gut, but the thing is rye, barley, whole wheat contain gluten, and therefore people are cutting them out, but actually they contain additional nutrients and things called prebiotics, certain fibers which feed the gut bacteria. So by cutting them out because of the gluten, you're actually missing out on some beneficial foods. And we've seen in studies, again, observational studies, people who cut out gluten unnecessarily, i.e. they don't have celiac disease, actually have poorer gut health.
Yeah. Something that I really love that's come out of this conversation around the link between the gut and the brain is actually this idea that mental health is not just in anyone's head, it has real physical effects. And I saw that when started working as a doctor, and I just noticed my immune system just took a dive. And I'd been in hospitals for the whole of medical school, and then started working as a doctor, was so much more stressed. And every single 2 weeks I was getting a cough or a cold, nothing that would get me off work, but just my immune system just wasn't working. And I realized, wait, this stress does not just exist in your head. Stress permeates into every single part of our system, our immune system, our gut health. It is everywhere. Stress can delay your period. Like, nothing really is just in your head. And the conversations around gut health are really bringing that to the forefront. Would you mind explaining what exactly is this gut-brain link?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good one. And certainly in terms of your experience with medical school, I was actually thinking at some stage to go into medicine as a freshman. And I saw on the wards how rough you guys got treated as junior doctors. And I was like, oh no, that is not for me. I'm going to, try advance the research one. That's how I'll kind of get my kind of contribution, because it's tough, isn't it? Like, it is, wild. And my husband's an HSGP, so I see it still, like, and I see the stress and on him, right? And he, never really wants to talk about the stress, but some days after work, like, he just needs to be a zombie in the corner and just take his space for half an hour because he's dealt with things that I don't want to know about. I say to him, don't tell me about all the horrible things in the world, because I'd rather be ignorant, right? But that was a bit of a tangent in terms of just the gut-brain axis. So essentially there is this two-way communication that occurs between our gut and our brain. And like you alluded to, we've all kind of experienced it at some stage, that activation. If you're nervous or even excited or in love, you get the butterflies in your tummy, right? That's the perfect example. But as you alluded to, I think historically, certainly myself and so many scientists never took it seriously because it was a bit like
woo-woo.
Hippie. Yeah, exactly. Woo-woo, right? But now we've got the mechanism. So it's convinced even the most skeptical scientists like myself, they're like, actually, this is a legitimate thing.
Yeah.
And then I see it play out in clinic. I'm like, this is really helping people. Like, this is a science-backed solution. So in terms of how they're communicating, particularly those microbes, right? It's kind of this new space. And I think of it as three different analogies. One is the alarm system of how the microbes communicate with the brain, right? So I suggested before that 70% of the immune system lives in the gut. So the immune system and those microbes live side by side. If the microbes sense something's gone on, they activate the immune system, i.e. that alarm system. The immune system then produces inflammatory markers that then send signal to things like our brain to change how we're acting and produce other hormones, all that sort of stuff. So that's the first one. The second one is like a mobile phone, where the microbes, again, want to quickly chat to the brain and say, look, something's coming, or do this, do that. They send messages up by things like the vagus nerve. I think people are starting to hear that word. So it's part of what we call the enteric nervous system, which is literally hundreds of millions of nerves that connect the two. So it's like this communication highway, like a mobile phone. And then the third one is a good old postal service, where based on what we're feeding those microbes, like the fiber we mentioned, so fiber feeds the bacteria, they then produce these special chemicals. They then get into the blood, and some of them are thought to pass that blood-brain barrier, again, having that messaging system there. So we've got the alarm system, mobile phone, and the postal service in terms of the hardcore mechanisms that this is a real thing, this gut-brain connection.
I think probably the best thing to come out of this podcast is when you get experts on and they give the most incredible analogies to really make such complex concepts so much simpler. And I love the analogy of the different types of communication. I think that makes it really easy to understand. Some things are very quick and some things maybe take a little bit more time. I also love that you mentioned the vagus nerve, because it's for so long, poor women for many, many, many years, they've been going into their doctors and they've been saying, I'm really anxious. And the doctor has said, have you tried deep breathing? And I'm sure a lot of these women have wanted to smack the doctor across the face. But I think this conversation around the vagus nerve now, thank God, it's really helping people to understand that when you do these deep breathing exercises, it's not just to calm you down when you don't feel calm, and it's not supposed to be patronizing. There is this this physiological response when you deep breathe from your diaphragm, you push out your tummy, you activate that vagus nerve, you're hijacking your nervous system to calm it down. And yeah, so I love that you mentioned the vagus nerve. I want to talk about probiotics and prebiotics, because I believe your PhD was prebiotics or probiotics. Probiotics.
Symbiotics. So another word people are hearing. So probiotics, i.e. those live microbes. Prebiotics is like the food for the microbes. Certain types of fibers generally add them together, and it's called a symbiotic because of their synergistic effects. But yeah, so I mean, there's so many words out there, and these biotics, and then you'll hear things like the postbiotic, where it's very much in research stages, but it's like giving people non-living bacteria and whether that can have a benefit. But in terms of, I guess, where the science is at, right?
Yeah.
So I very rarely recommend anyone needs to supplement with a prebiotic supplement, right? Because if you're having your plant diversity, things like your chickpeas, your butter beans, your garlic onion, they're such good sources of prebiotic and actually quite tasty.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, you don't need to worry about it. And, you know, we know that if you have too many prebiotics and you've got IBS and you kind of dump, again, that fiber load of the prebiotics, it could aggravate symptoms. So I kind of avoid that space. But probiotics, probiotic, those live microbes is one that I think there is so much marketing myths around, right? And like I said, you know, it's part of my PhD. So I feel very like kind of protective and like we need to get the science out there because, you know, there was one survey in like 2,000 people that showed that about 50% of people taken probiotics, but I think it was like nearly 80% said they saw no benefit. And it's not because probiotics don't work, right? It's because we haven't been using them correctly.
Okay.
So for general gut health, like having more different microbes in you, you don't need to take a probiotic supplement. Like there has never been a clinical trial to show that.
Yeah.
Yet most of the brands are marketing, you should take this daily one and you'll have great gut health, right? I wish that was the case, but it's not. So general gut health, it's more like fermented foods and plant diversity. Yeah. Is how we kind of feed those microbes. But probiotics can be very therapeutic and very essentially issue specific. So I kind of think of them like a specialist doctor, so to speak. So if you know, have iron deficiency, I wouldn't go and give you vitamin D supplement. I would give you the iron supplement, right? Yeah. That's the same with probiotics. There's like thousands of different types of bacteria. We call them strains. And each different one does a different thing. So we need to get very, very specific on that note. So an example is there is, you know, been a randomized placebo-controlled trials showing that if you struggle with thrush, which I didn't know, you as a medic probably would be very aware that it's it's 75% of women will experience at least one bout of thrush in their lifetime.
Wow.
Right?
No, I didn't know that.
It's wild.
No way.
Absolutely wild. So, you know, a lot of people would come to see me in clinic and be like, I want the anti-candida diet. And I'm like, sorry, no evidence for that. Could make your candida worse by being really restrictive. Yeah. So I didn't really have anything in my toolkit for these patients. So when I saw these, you know, clinical trials, I was like, wow, this is very, very cool. So what the researchers did is put people on specific strains of bacteria. Yeah. Right? So these women had vaginal thrush. So all of them wanted an antifungal, right? So medical therapy we know works. Yeah. The issue is relapse rate, like 45%, like huge, and they get in this vicious cycle of ongoing meds. So they either, in addition to their antifungal, had the specific strains called LA14 and HNO1 with lactoferrins. The specific combination, which we now see, is helpful for preventing bacterial and fungal overgrowth in the vagina, right? So they either had that or a placebo, a fake intervention, which, as you know, really important because of that gut-brain axis, to give people a fake intervention and not let them know. Otherwise, subconsciously, if they think they're doing good, they might, you know, change their diet or do other things and they get the benefit. So half of them got a fake intervention, half of them got those specific strains. Then at the 6 months point, those who had the specific strains had a 3-fold reduced risk of getting thrush reoccurrence compared to the placebo group.
Oh, brilliant.
So really effective sort of stuff, right? But it comes back to that concept that each different strain does a different thing. So for general gut health, save your money, but there are certain areas Cold and flu is another one. If you go on antibiotics and colicky babies, it's kind of where, as a clinician, I would be like, hand on heart, there is, evidence to go down this track with these specific strains.
Having a targeted approach.
Yeah.
And the marketing is just the wild west when it comes to gut health and probiotics.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I started Smart Strains, right? Not because I wanted to have a business, because I'm like, no, I've got enough going on. But literally, I spent like 2 to 3 years trying to convince a lot of these companies. I'm like, look, we have these international medical clinical guidelines. So from the World Gastroenterology Organization that says, if someone goes on antibiotics, you give them the LGG strain at 10 billion units twice a day during their antibiotics, right? And that reduces antibiotic-associated diarrhea by like 70% compared to placebo. I'm like, these are the guidelines. Can you not just change your formulations and follow the guidelines, right? So we can give people the right ones. And they were like, we get it, but we've already formulated it and we've got a good thing going on. They literally just wouldn't listen to me. I was like, this is so unfair. The marketing is wild, right?
And that's really interesting, because I'm going to hold my hands up now, in probably a little bit embarrassing to admit. I've never prescribed anyone a probiotic after prescribing them antibiotics. And actually to hear that they're on some guidelines, I don't know any other doctor who has, but if any of my friends come to me and they've been prescribed antibiotics, I will always, depending on, what they've been prescribed the antibiotics for, I will say, look, this is when it is a good idea to probably have a probiotic and which probiotics I have. But actually, the fact that we're not doing that in NHS hospitals, but I have treated a lot of people for antibiotic-induced diarrhea. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, a big issue that I have with a lot of probiotic brands is the level of, a lot of them just don't really have enough. Is that what you find as well?
Well, yeah. So some of them might not have enough, but also it's not necessarily just in the dose. It generally comes down to, I say, the right strain at the right time in the right way. So it's things like the format as well. Sometimes actually powder, we think is probably better than a capsule form if you want to get into the lung microbiome and reduce risk of things like cold and flu, for example. So we need to get very specific and quite sciencey, but that's the way we, have to use probiotics to get any sort of benefit. I mean, it is, my husband, again, NHS GP, how many antibiotics does he prescribe, right? And he was completely unaware of the World Gastro Guidelines. So unless you're in that space,
I had no idea.
You're just not aware.
Idea.
You're just not aware of it, right? And so a lot of these companies, some of them even literally say probiotics for when you're on antibiotics, but they're like giving the iron supplement when the person has a vitamin D deficiency. They're literally giving the wrong strain. I'm like, we have the guidelines. They say this strain is the one that's protective for antibiotics. Just give it to them. Why are you giving the wrong one? It's like, it is such a frustrating space to have that disconnect between the science and what's available on the shelf, right?
But people get away with it because people are willing to spend their money. And like, I've got friends, and literally I was speaking to a friend only a couple of days ago, and poor gal, she has had a lot of thrush, bacterial vaginosis, recurrence, and she's been on so many different types of antibiotics. And people are desperate. When you have got a bad tummy, you've got your vaginal microbiome is upset, you just want a solution, and you are willing to pay anything for that solution. And that's why these companies can kind of get away with it. It's really interesting you said about the sachets, because my boyfriend, he actually brought me the Smart Strains one, and I didn't realise they were in sachets. So he brought me it in the glass, and I was like, what is this? And he said, oh, they're the probiotics. I didn't realise that there's some evidence.
That reason.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's all the clinical trials that have shown the LGG and BP12 strain given together reduces in infants, it reduces recurrence of respiratory tract infections by 50% compared to placebo. And in adults, it reduces duration of cold and flu by 2 days compared to placebo. And they're all in sachet forms.
Oh,
so mechanistically, if you think about it, we don't just have a gut microbiome, we've got a lung microbiome. So if you're kind of giving it more in a capsule form and it's not necessarily, getting to that right place, like the oral pharynx region, mechanistically in my mind, so I'm like, just follow whatever the clinical trial has done to get the results. Just replicate that, right? Like don't try to do anything, fancy, because this is why we have research studies to replicate them in the real world. And I think, what you say about, a lot of the marketing and, I could go on about it, but I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of got into science translation and, into these other areas is because, I lost my sister to a medical mistake, right? And I know they happen, right? Again, my husband's a medic. It's just one of those things. Like no one can know everything and all that sort of stuff. But I always kind of told myself that if we have the science to do better, we should use it.
Yeah.
So I've got a real thing inside of me that's like, we've got this science around this probiotic space. Why are we not using it? I just can't let it rest. So it's one of those things where sometimes it's that personal drive that's like, you've just got to make a change. If people aren't making the change for you, you just got to go out there and do it.
And that's so incredible. I think we're really missing, we really are losing the war to misinformation. And, we've seen that with Trump and paracetamol in pregnant women. We are losing the war to misinformation. And I think so much of that comes from experts like yourself not feeling comfortable or confident putting themselves out on the internet. And I would highly recommend anyone watching, if you don't already follow Dr. Megan, she posts some absolutely brilliant stuff. Not just brilliant stuff, I think it's just absolutely, it's a personal responsibility. I think we all have to break up our feeds with evidence.
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm a bit of an introvert, right? And a lot of people are like, but why would you put yourself out there in science communication? I'm like, because it's that deep-seated obligation, that sense of responsibility to help. Because it is. It's not if it's not inherent to you to go out on social media and stuff like that, it can be really uncomfortable and awkward and stuff like that. You seem more of a natural. I love what you're doing. But I think as a healthcare professional, you do get this sense of obligation. And I think it's so important that we put ourselves out there, because otherwise these messages can spread that are so dangerous that I just hate people suffering for no reason, essentially.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that we also kind of talk about some of the dangers that are coming out with not using probiotics correctly. I guess there's some research about potentially some relation to antibiotic resistance. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, look, so again, there's this myth out there, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'll think about probiotics after my antibiotics. I'm like, no. The guidelines and the clinical trials actually show you take it during your antibiotic.
Interesting.
Not, think, after, I'll take it as an after, thing. It's to protect your gut during that process. Now, there was a study, it was a very small study, but still I think mechanistically it's eye-opening.
Yeah.
And what they looked at is everyone wanted antibiotics for different reasons. Then some of the participants went on a generic, probiotic after.
Yeah.
And the others didn't go on that probiotic. And those who went on the probiotic, actually, their microbiome took longer to recover compared to those who didn't go on it, right? So these are live microorganisms that we're putting into our body. And I think people are like, I'll just try it and just see how I go. But I wouldn't necessarily be wanting to put anything into my body unless I knew that it was going to definitely be safe and it's not going to have any negative impact. And like you said, there's obviously areas around, we know our microbes are so intelligent, they can actually share genes with other microbes, right? And that's where the antibiotic resistance issue comes in, where, microbes might learn how to avoid being killed and then pass that on to the other microbes and things like that. So it's really important that the strains, i.e. the types of bacteria putting into body, are really heavily researched, their genetics are being, viewed and all of that sort of stuff. And the world's most studied type of bacteria is that LGG strain of bacteria.
Yeah.
Right. And the most studied type of bifidobacteria, which is another kind of healthy one a lot of people know of, is BB12.
Okay.
Bifidobacterium 12. So again, it's not a case of take it as an insurance policy when it comes to probiotics, in my mind anyway. We need to get very specific and think kind of nearly like medications in a way. Well, you shouldn't just take it for the sake of it. You want to make sure you're taking the right one.
It's the same as antibiotics, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've got so many friends who they get a UTI and then they tell me that they're taking this antibiotic that they got a couple of years ago from tonsillitis that is in the cupboard. And I'm like, guys, no, please do not do that. There are different antibiotics for different bugs. That's not how you should be using antibiotics. So I think taking a similar approach to probiotics can be helpful. So our listeners are probably thinking, right, I'm getting a recurring thrush or recurring bacterial vaginosis. I'm going to my doctor, I'm getting antibiotics. My doctor has never mentioned probiotics to me in these consultations because, like Faye, they actually didn't even realise. I'm so embarrassed to admit that, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Where can they suggest their doctor looks for this information so they can get helpful information about their probiotics?
Yeah, a very good question, right? So we mentioned the World Gastroenterology Organization.
Okay.
So they, 2024, have a new guidelines on probiotics. Now, this is what one of the frustration is that in there includes about the colic,
Okay.
as well as the leading pediatric guidelines say about colic and taking the BB12 strain of bacteria if Bub's got colic. They also have the antibiotic one, as we mentioned, but they very much keep to just the gut.
Okay.
There is no guideline that will cover vaginal microbiome and things like that. So that's when you need to look at things like Cochrane reviews and look at what the body of evidence is saying about certain things. And then kind of, it's really difficult, right?
Yeah.
I understand why. Unless you've got the special interest, as a clinician, you're not going to know which of the formulations, what are the recommendations, because is quite sparse.
Yeah.
In terms, you got to look in different places. There's no one thing. But as a starting point, it would be those two places. So look at Cochrane, the World Gastro Organization guidelines on probiotics, and then PubMed.
Yeah.
Like when someone comes to see me in clinic where there might be no clinical guidelines around a space.
Yeah.
But I know that there is a few new clinical trials. I will look, has there been, and this is what I recommend people always do, if someone gives them or tries to sell them a supplement, right?
Yeah.
I think you should always say, okay, well, has there been a human clinical trial showing that exact formulation, none of this kind of like take this strain, put them together because they can actually compete and then rule each other out.
Yeah.
Has that formulation been shown in a clinical trial to have the benefit I want? If there hasn't, then obviously you can do what you want, right? But I would say there's probably going to be something else that you could take that's going to at least have more of a chance to have a benefit.
Yeah.
And obviously if it's placebo controlled, that's going to be even better in terms of your likelihood of that working. So it's kind of, having to go, sadly, to scientific resources. But obviously, the gut health doctor, we've got loads of, free resources with the science kind of digested in a little bit more kind of a collated way, including for healthcare professionals if people want a little bit more up to speed stuff on probiotics as well.
Oh, that's so brilliant. I wish I'd known that when I was prescribing everyone antibiotics in the hospital. That's absolutely brilliant. Community question, in terms of resetting or cleaning your gut, do you favour small daily changes or a full, and I use this word very painfully, a full detox once in a while?
I mean, I totally get it. Like, detoxes sound so legit. And so I want to cleanse myself, particularly if you go through a patch where like around Christmas, maybe you're overdoing it, having too many Prosecco's, all that sort of stuff. You just be like, you know what, today's the day. I just want that cleanse.
Yeah.
Right. So I totally get why that's a conceptual thing, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
In fact, all of these cleanses, whether it is like a juice cleanse, what happens is you're literally just having all the fruit and vegetable sugars, right? And the juice, what is the difference between a juice and a real homemade smoothie is that juice has just the sugars, whereas a smoothie has the whole fruit, a whole veg blended up. So you get the fibers as well, right? So fiber, like we alluded to, is what feeds those gut bacteria.
Yeah.
So if you're going on these juice cleanses, essentially you're starving those trillions of microbes. And like us, like humans, they get hangry. So there's been these animal studies, but still I think mechanistically it's helpful to understand that in mice studies, when they're fed a really low fiber diet, the microbes start to eat away at the mucus lining in the gut and therefore makes the gut a little bit more vulnerable to immune activation and sensitivity and inflammation and things like that. So actually, it's not a case of, you can do your cleanse, there's no harm. Sometimes I think there can be harm of doing these extreme cleanses.
Yeah.
Kind of starves those microbes, makes your gut a little bit more vulnerable. And then when you start to reintroduce food, you might be like, oh, I get a lot of symptoms. I've got all these intolerances. It's because actually you probably damaged your gut during the cleanse. So we need to be really careful, I think, of the consequences of these cleanses.
I read some research a very long time ago, so you're going to have to correct me if I've got this completely wrong, but I think it was saying that actually you can really improve your gut health quite significantly in just a couple of days, but then obviously conversely you can change your gut health in a negative way in just a couple of days. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but moving towards the small daily changes just seems like a much better option if that is correct. What I've just said.
No, absolutely, that's correct. We know if you go on extreme diet within a couple of days, your microbes start to change. what I would say in terms of then when you start to feel better, it usually is probably between 4 and 12 weeks, right?
Okay.
Because just because your microbes are starting to change doesn't necessarily mean the chemicals they're producing and therefore the things that they're doing change straight away as well. So I would say if people, try and make these changes and they're like, it's been 2 weeks and I don't get any, improvement, right? Honestly, I know it's painful, but wait it out for at least 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Because it takes a while for the microbes, yes, to change, but then to change their behaviors, and their behaviors then to change the chemicals they're producing and all of that sort of stuff. So it's not like a instant, oh my God, I've just eaten this and now instantly my mental health is better. But we do have clinical trials that show starting to nourish your microbiome through plant diversity, oily fish, fermented dairy, actually can have clinically meaningful improvements in people who actually have, depression. Right.
Yeah.
And the studies, the first kind of landmark study was the 3-month mark when they started to see benefits. New studies have come out suggesting even at 3 weeks, people have started to report improved mental health benefits of really focusing on nourishing their gut microbes through plant diversity and those other bits.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
And do you know what? In this world of instant gratification, I know even 3 weeks can probably seem like a long time, but 3 weeks is incredible, especially when you're busy. You blink and 3 weeks is gone. That neatly brings me on to a really, really commonly asked question was, what advice would you give for busy women who they don't really have much time? They are reaching for the ultra processed foods as a means of convenience. They're probably not eating the best things for their gut health. What advice would you give for them on your top tips? Any quick, easy gut health hacks?
Yeah, look, I mean, totally get it. And I think another myth to bust is very much you don't need to spend hours in the kitchen to have good gut health or spend loads of money to have good gut health, right? It's like simple hacks. Even if it's like, Friday night getting Indian takeaway, literally get a can of mixed beans. They're like 70p for a whole can. Triple rinse them if you've got more of a sensitive gut because it can help reduce some of those prebiotics, which are good for most people, but actually if you've got the sensitive gut, literally add it to your takeaway and get the flavor in, because what happens, that's got loads of fibers, even protein as well, which really feeds those microbiome, kind of the things that they want. So you still get the joy and the convenience of, a takeaway dish, but you're feeding your microbes. So I'm all about adding in. You got a fruit smoothie, right? Get some frozen cauliflower, literally buy it already frozen and cooked. So you don't need to do anything yourself. It's grabbing it out of the freezer. You just have to have it in your freezer. So always have some frozen cauliflower and frozen veg in general in your freezer. And pop it in your fruit smoothie, blend it up. You can't even taste it. It actually adds a bit of extra smoothness and creaminess, right? So those sorts of things. I think stir-fry mixed veg packs are godsend. They're already cut up for you. Whack them in the, the fry pan, a bit of soy sauce, some Worcestershire sauce, another can of mixed beans, some salmon if you've got the 5-10 minutes to cook the salmon in there, sprinkle of mixed seeds, maybe some nuts in there. That's like a really gut-loving dinner in 9 minutes. I think I've timed myself once. So, it's about getting those habits formed and having the stuff in your fridge and in your cupboards and in your freezer. So when you're at the grocery store, literally just think convenience and diversity. Don't buy the grains that you're going to have to soak for 4 hours. Like, I know everyone has the best intentions, but most people never touch them and then it just puts them off, right? You can get these really great microwave packs that's got like 3 different types of, different grains. And just check, again, it's annoying because this whole ultra processed world is like, I can't just say go that pack anymore because actually some of the brands have got loads of added sugar and emulsifiers in it. Whereas actually there's a few brands, really great, which actually are still quite clean.
Yeah.
Same with wraps, right? I think one wrap brand that I saw has got like 14 different ingredients. Then there's another wrap brand, I think it's Crosta Milica. It's got like 3 ingredients, right? And it's like, it proves that you don't need these extra additives in some of these foods. They're just putting it in because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So boringly, some foods you do need to check the labels off if you are going for convenience.
I love that you said about it taking 9 minutes to do your stir fry because I am so guilty of getting home from a busy day, being so tired, going, right, it's Uber Eats time. And actually, it definitely takes me longer to get my Uber Eats than it would to just stick everything in the pan and just whiz it round, you know? And I also love that you said about the butter beans, because I've had a little bit of a tricky journey with my relationship with food, my relationship with exercise, my relationship with body. Like, so many women, I've slipped down the path of maybe restrictive eating. And I think the biggest help that I found was getting out of the all or nothing mindset. You don't have to shut yourself in a box for the rest of your life. Get the Indian takeaway, but the attitude of adding stuff, I think, is so much healthier and makes it so much more attainable. So I really, really love those tips. They're absolutely brilliant. You mentioned ultra processed foods. Are there any top tips you have for just navigating this new ultra processed landscape?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of different, people saying different things, right? And I think ultimately in the scientific world, the true definition of something that's ultra processed doesn't necessarily dictate health, right? So there's this NOVA classification system, and our team at King's is actually doing research at the moment to look at, okay, can we redefine what system we use that actually brings health into it? So for example, if you have a plant milk, because people don't drink milk for, maybe animal cruelty reasons or whatever it is, then if you add the calcium and some iodine, because that's also a good source of cow's milk's got iodine in it generally, then that would instantly make that product ultra processed. Right? So it'll come up on those apps that people are using, and everyone's like, oh, I should go the organic one that's not fortified with calcium iodine, because that's saying it's not ultra processed. So literally, because they're adding nutrients that are actually quite important for that particular person, if they're cutting, dairy out, that makes it ultra processed. So there's some nuances in there where I'm like, that's quite a misleading concept. But of course, then there is a whole lot of truth, the fact that a lot of ultra processed foods have so much extra bits in it. And it's not just things like your sugar and your fats, right? It's these extra additives, which again, I would never be fear-mongering around. There's 400 plus additives, which have historically been approved as safe, right? Obviously, they wouldn't be allowed in our food system, right? We do have a lot of protocols to make sure we're trying to protect people. But a lot of that safety data happened before we understood about our gut microbes.
Yeah.
Right? So we're now looking to retest the safety of different categories. And our team at King's has actually just looked at food additive emulsifiers. So there's over 60 of them. They're found in most ultra-processed foods. And what we did was, it was a world first clinical trial in people with Crohn's disease. So a type of autoimmune condition, inflammatory bowel disease. So they specifically have a genetic susceptibility to gut inflammation, right? But what we did show, we put half of them on a emulsifier containing diet, i.e. a normal diet, half of them on emulsifier free diet. And those who had the emulsifier free diet had a statistically, improvement not only in things like their symptoms, but disease severity. Yeah. Right? So from that, I'm never going to go say everyone needs to cut out all emulsifiers, because not everyone's in that same category. But I think what it does show is actually some of these food additives, if we're having large amounts of them, like 90% of our diet is ultra processed, then actually maybe they could be having a negative impact on our gut microbiome. So don't go crazy with it. Still have, foods that may contain emulsifiers, like chocolate's one that typically has emulsifiers in it. But just look at the portions and how many of your food's coming from a packet. I know it's a long-winded answer, but yeah, it's quite a nuanced topic, isn't it, right? So we do need to try and make more food from home, start to check the labels. If it's got, I usually say, more than 2 ingredients that you're like, I probably wouldn't have at home, maybe it's not a great brand to have, and check for a brand that maybe has got more. But just because it's not ultra processed doesn't mean it's got loads of added sugar, loads of added fat, which we know isn't great either. So do you know what I mean? There's a lot going on there.
It's a very, very difficult landscape to navigate, because I know that taking a more simplistic view of, if I don't have those ingredients in my cupboard, it may be like, have a second thought. I know that will get comments of people criticising that, but I think in this landscape where it's so difficult to navigate, that is quite an easy tool for people to use to try and make sense of it. And, science is always changing. And I think it can be easy to have this perception that doctors and scientists have all the answers. But every single day we are learning. I don't think there's a single day where I don't learn something new that often changes my mind, which is very difficult to give advice when we're always learning new stuff as well.
Yeah, Faye, I couldn't agree more. Like, there's nothing more disconcerting than an expert changing their mind on a topic, because you're like, I believed what you said, what is going on? And I think that's why, like, again, when it comes to social media, there's a responsibility of not putting something out just because one single study showed something that goes against the other 50, right?
Yeah.
Because we know statistically speaking that can happen by chance.
Yeah.
So it's kind of looking, okay, what's the whole body of evidence saying? And like, for now, this is what we should do. Maybe in a year, there'll be more stuff. And that's exactly where the microbiome's at as well.
Yeah. So another community question that we got, is there a link between gut health and PMS/PMDD symptoms? And are there any ways to improve PMS through gut health? And then, such as cycle-based nutrition. Sorry, that's a huge question.
Yeah, no. It's a really interesting one, right? And I think a lot of women probably suspect there's a link there because, you know, at certain times of their periods, like, you know, when they're actually getting their periods, menstruating, you know, they might get period poops, right?
Yeah.
Looser stools. So they kind of see, oh, my gut is changing with hormones. Like, clearly something's going on. And absolutely, because a lot of the hormones and hormone-like chemicals that are produced to make things like your uterus contract, that's not just isolated to your uterus, right? It's also impacting your gut lining as well. So things like those prostaglandins kind of make your gut muscles contract, and that's why you kind of get that looser period poop. Whereas things like progesterone, which is elevated in other parts of the cycle, we know that kind of slows down. So you might find that other times of your period, you're going to get more like constipation. So there certainly is, you know, links and mechanistic understanding, and therefore, you know, things that I would recommend. So if you are really struggling with period poops, and it's like, you know, similar to like the IBS, first line dietary advice is like watching the caffeine, watching the spicy foods, the fatty foods, having smaller, more frequent meals, watching things like sugar alcohols, like polyols, which are a lot of sugar-free foods that can exacerbate diarrhea as well. So at that time of the month, then you might want to, you know, be more aware of those foods.
Yeah.
And then other times of the month when you are more constipated perhaps, then we know that psyllium husk fibre, which is available from most health food stores, really is quite a good laxating fibre. It's not going to give you that immediate urgency. So it's not like a laxative, but it's just a natural kind of gentle, like laxating fibre. After a couple of days of having about 1 or 2 tablespoons, you'll start to feel like you've got more bulk in your bowel movements, which I love talking about.
Yeah.
So there's kind of strategies that I would say that are pretty much all based on what your gut symptoms are like, and therefore we can help certain dietary tweaks. I would say things like cyclic kind of nutrition tips of like, you know, seed cycling and stuff like that. There's no science really behind that. So I would respond to people's gut symptoms and therefore change their diet accordingly at different times of months. But other than that, I wouldn't worry. And then I think overall, in terms of thinking more about, you know, that link between if you've got good gut health, does that mean you have less PMS symptoms? And actually there has been studies to suggest, again, observational, but they've shown that people or women who have less than 2 pieces of fruit a day seem to have more painful periods. Right?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And we know obviously that fruit, you know, it has a little bit of sugar in it. Oh my God. But it's definitely important to include because it contains all these other phytochemicals, which are like these different chemicals which feed your gut microbes and all the different fibers and the antioxidants, all that sort of stuff. So again, why we should never fearmonger food just because it's got, you know, some sugar in it. The same with the gluten and the grains. There's other consequences of cutting these foods out, right? So then also there was another study showing that women who had extra virgin olive oil on a daily basis also seemed to have lighter periods. So if you're struggling really with heavy periods. So again, these are observational studies because unfortunately the funders don't really or haven't so far put a lot of money into women's health research, right? And I think that's a huge bugbear for many of us women. So we have just to go on these observational studies, which again, just science speak, but essentially it's when you look at populations and say, okay, well, these guys are doing this and having better periods. Therefore, maybe that's what we should do. Where you have an intervention study, everyone on their periods, half of them get a certain diet, half of them get another diet. That's the intervention. That's the gold standard sort of way to determine what we should recommend. So yeah, I think we've got, you know, the emerging research showing that people who do feed their gut microbes, all the different types of plants, you know, have the extra virgin olive oil full again of these different plant chemicals which feed the gut bacteria, you know, can have, you know, better or lower PMS. So yeah, worth definitely getting on board for sure.
I'm so glad you said about the cycle-based nutrition because same as you is, you know, I wouldn't advocate for that because there isn't the research for it. At the same time, I will always say a lack of evidence is not evidence in itself. However, my biggest issue with anything cycle syncing is women have enough on their plate than to be thinking every morning, I need to be doing something different. If you want to build habits that last a lifetime, the way to absolutely not do that is to try change your daily routine every single day. Like, stick to these daily small habits that you can do every single day instead of shifting around. Get your fibre in, get your plant diversity in, not trying to overcomplicate it.
Yeah, and setting yourself up for failure, right?
Yeah.
And there's also that thing called the nocebo effect. So opposite of placebo, when placebo, if you think you're doing something good, then you can change other behaviors and feel good. Whereas this nocebo effect is when you think you're doing something bad, i.e. not seed cycling, because you've heard other people saying it and you're like, but I can't be bothered or I don't have the time, then you can physically start to feel worse.
Yeah.
Because of that gut-brain axis, and maybe subconsciously you're choosing other things, right? So like you said, I agree that I think there's some damaging things where you don't need to have a clinical trial to follow certain things, absolutely not. But if it's unrealistic expectations, people are setting themselves up for failure, that nocebo effect really can give their body more inflammation, low-grade inflammation and things like that, right? So you need to be aware of the power of that brain filtering down, like you said at the very start about the stress.
Yeah.
Like, it's a real thing. It's
It
a
really
real thing.
is. You touched on sweetness a little bit earlier on, and myself and my boyfriend, probably our biggest disagreement that we have is sweeteners, because my boyfriend is a proper gym person. And I think I reckon probably about like 5 years ago, it was the big trend of calories in versus calories out is the only thing that is important. So that's kind of his mindset. He's quite pro sweeteners if they help people lose weight and stuff like that. I probably have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective, and I think you've done some incredible videos, really nuanced videos about sweeteners. Could you give us a brief overview of the impact of sweeteners on the gut and what maybe to look out for?
Yeah. What's your boyfriend's name?
His name's Dylan.
Dylan, make sure you're listening to this right now.
I'm going to have to play it because I can never explain it well either. You know, when someone puts you on the spot and I'm like, so I can just replay this. Thank you.
No, I totally get it, because I used to have, when I was at uni, we were studying nutrition, we were learning about the calories. We're like, Coke Zero, all that sort of stuff. I had to wean myself off. That was very difficult. But another tip, switch it, don't ditch it. So now I just have like the sparkling water with the natural flavors in it, right? If I just tried to go cold turkey, I would never have gotten off Coke Zero. But anyway, back to these sweeteners. So it's this case of, can we have our cake and eat it too? Yeah. Right? And actually, I think our bodies are much smarter than allowing us to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, the World Health Organization came out a couple of years ago, and then the UK guidance is just updated earlier this year to say the same thing, that actually they don't recommend we have these non-sugar sweeteners, we call them, for weight management or for reducing risk of things like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, because the research doesn't suggest that. Now, the reason for that is, yes, when you have them, they aren't providing as many calories, and some of them no calories, because we might not be absorbing them. But they're doing other things that could actually put weight on us. And that's why we don't see such clear benefits in these clinical trials and the observational studies, which is why the World Health Organization has changed their view on them recently. So some of the mechanisms is that they make us more sweet needing, right? The more we have of them, the more actually in other areas we start to crave sweetness where maybe we wouldn't have craved it. And there's been some research that have shown that when people have a lot of these sweeteners, the next day they actually consume more calories through other foods than they would have if they didn't have those sweeteners, right? So, reassessing your sweet tolerance is one element. And then there's other things around the microbiome, right? So because a lot of these aren't absorbed, they get malabsorbed, and I think I mentioned at the start, the microbes, typically most of them live in that last 1.5 meters where only unabsorbed stuff gets there, which is why fiber, again, we mentioned that a lot, but human cells can't digest it. So actually it gets malabsorbed, which people think, oh, that's scary. But actually it's just because it's fuel for your microbes, and that's how they get fed. They've got the enzymes to break it down, produce all that good stuff. So in terms of a lot of these sweeteners, if we're not absorbing them, they can impact our gut microbes directly. And there's research that are suggested, again, there's many different types of these sweeteners, right? But some of them, even stevia, I thought that might change some of those microbes and how they're working, right? So there's these kind of unknown factors which again, if you weigh up on the observational studies where we're showing, well, actually people who are having a lot of these don't seem to be the lower body weight, lower risk like we should. And then we get these research studies showing mechanistically it changes the microbiome. We don't quite know what that exactly means yet. You put it together and you're like, maybe we can't have our cake and eat it too. So I think we need to be aware of the consequences of them, I think.
I think just the theme of probably the next 5 years is going to be, oh, wait, we actually couldn't outsmart our body, you know, and we're seeing that with ultra-processed foods and sweeteners. And you're so right about the taste thing. No one wants to have an apple after a Diet Coke. Like the apple is not going to taste the same at all, or a strawberry even, you know, like really fruit that is so like tastes incredible.
Yeah.
But you have a donut or a really, really highly sweetened food before it. Just you're not going to want it.
Yeah. 100%. In fact, you know, as a population, we have just generally become so more like sweet needing that even things like the variety of the apples and the pears, the farmers have started to go for the sweeter versions because they sell more, right? Because historically they used to have more kind of not so sweet, more bitter, and everyone was happy and fine with them, right? They didn't have that expectation. Whereas now, if you have an apple and you're like, oh, that wasn't very sweet, I might chuck it away because you'd require that. The good news is there was a study, it took just the 2 weeks, so our taste buds regenerate every 10 or so days of kind of, you can either go cold turkey on these sweeteners and it's really painful and you'll feel awful. Or if you do the more gradual approach, which is probably what I would recommend so you don't have those withdrawal symptoms, then after about, 2 to 4 weeks, depending on which version you take, then actually your taste buds become more sweet sensitive. So you can undo it, right? It's just about taking that time and understanding that period might be a little bit like, oh, this doesn't taste good, but rest assured, you will start to get that sweetness back as your taste buds adapt.
That's really interesting, 10 days. So if you're listening and you need your Diet Coke every single day, then 10 days to lower it down in your taste buds should hopefully...
And switch it with something else that's got that bubble, right? Otherwise, you will then just have that hole in your heart or in that time of the day where you usually have it, like smoking habits, right? They're always like, you do something else with your fingers.
Yeah, replace it. Yeah. I'm going to ask you the question we've been asking all our guests at the end. But first, I just really quickly wanted to touch on electrolytes because you did an incredible video about electrolytes recently. And I did one yesterday that went on TikTok and it caused a lot of controversy. And but not from a gut health perspective, from a different perspective, because I was talking about the marketing of electrolytes, I think is really interesting. From a gut health perspective, what are some of the potential concerns with taking electrolytes every single day, as some electrolyte companies are recommending?
Yeah, so more than anyone, like as a medic, like if you have severe diarrhea and vomiting, then yes, you need to replace your electrolytes, right? Or if you're exercising, more than an hour and a half and profusely sweating, like we're talking a lot of lost electrolytes, then yes, you might want to replace. But people don't necessarily realize that some of the key electrolytes is like sodium chloride, i.e. salt, right? And they've all got loads of glucose in them, sugar. So salt and sugar, literally the key things that we're being told we're having way too much of. People are now supplementing and not realizing because they've got a sexy name called electrolytes.
Yeah.
And then other ones are like, oh, but we don't have any glucose. We've got no added sugar. Then they add the sweeteners in, right? And it's like, it is a bit bonkers if you know about nutrition, you know what's in electrolytes, that people are being fooled into thinking it's a health product when it's like super ultra processed. It's a bit wild, yeah.
But I just put on my TikTok that, I think we need to remember that it's just salt rebranded as being good for us. In 10 years ago, we were being told we're having too much salt. And people in the comments were saying, it's not just salt, it's potassium and magnesium. And I was like, A, they're in salt form. B, eat a banana and have some leafy greens. Like if you're eating a normal diet, you are probably getting enough potassium and magnesium. If you've got good kidneys, you're going to be weaning it out. And you're completely right. You're also adding in these things that probably are not going to be doing you any good.
Yeah, absolutely. And then because you're getting your calories or your magnesium or your potassium from that drink, then you're not having the banana, which also has prebiotics in it. And it's got another 200 different phytochemicals which feed your microbiome, right? So it's kind of that displacement as well. So there's so many things. Yeah, it's a real frustration.
Yeah. And
I'm happy you put that out.
It got way more controversy than I realised. But right, final question, bar one. Do we know if there's any sex differences between men and women when it comes to our guts? And should there be different approaches from a nutritional perspective?
Yeah, a very good question. And generally speaking, other factors like diet, exercise, age is going to have more of an impact on our gut health compared to gender. But absolutely, we do know that sex hormones are changing or are impacting our gut microbes. So it's a bi-directional relationship. So our hormones can impact our gut microbes, but also our gut microbes can impact our hormones. And certainly, I guess one of the kind of clearest signs we see is that when women go through the menopause, right, their microbiomes start to then look a little bit more similar to males in terms of the amount of microbial diversity, the number of different microbes. And that's because we no longer have the estrogen, which actually is thought to be, for some microbes, kind of a bit like a prebiotic, feeds them.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I guess what that means in terms of day to day, should we eat different to male or depending on our gender? The answer is not at this stage. But certainly when we go through perimenopause, I think gut health becomes even more important for women, where certain microbes really help regulate that estrogen and recycle it.
Interesting. Fab. I think we've covered most of the questions that people have asked. However, you may even have to come on again because there was so many. And I'm sure that even from this conversation, it'll spark, hopefully, a lot more really useful questions in the comments. So if anyone does have any extra questions, then make sure to leave a comment. I'm going to finish off with the question that we've been asking all our guests, which is, Dr. Megan, what do you wish every woman knew by the time she was 25?
I really wish, and again, it's a nerdy one, but they all knew that they had these trillions of microbes, that if you look after them, they absolutely will look after you. And again, we didn't have loads of time to talk about things like the estrobolome, the group of microbes that actually help regulate our estrogen. So maybe that's next time.
Yeah.
But literally, like, there is so many women's health issues that we could, you know, not always cure, but better manage and even prevent by nourishing this little community that can look after you. So, you know, like when women often when they're pregnant, like they start to go, oh, I want to be really healthy. Think of, you know, that's a fetus, but think of these microbes as like constantly these little like things in you that you need to nurture. And if you do, they'll look after you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on that. It's been an absolutely incredible conversation and I'm sure everyone has taken a lot from that. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.